show you how far do you say 25. Right. It's 25. So this is
Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again I'm coming to you with another range report. And today's range report, obviously, as you can see, is on a very cool historical rifle. This is a February 1945 production M1 Garand. And I already know some of you guys are typing in the comment section below, the inventor of this rifle, John Garand, didn't pronounce his name Garand. However, the US military called it the Garand, and so both pronunciations are correct. So you don't have to tell me that. So this is a really cool and historical rifle. In fact, George S. Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. And although my channel and my interest in firearms mainly surround modern tactical firearms, I definitely appreciate the history of firearms and how we got to where we're at today. And when it comes to the history of the United States military, this is probably one of the most important firearms that was ever adopted. In fact, this was the first semi-automatic rifle that was ever adopted by a world military. So it really does hold a place in US history and world history. But before we get into the things that I like and don't like about this gun and talk about its history, I always want to thank the people that make these reviews possible. First and foremost is the owner of this awesome rifle who lent it to the channel. He's a local subscriber and fan, Ken. Ken, thank you so much for lending this awesome piece of history for me to review and create this content. I also want to thank my Patreons as always, because through their monthly donations and support, they help keep the lights on around here. And if you guys want to be a Patreon, go check out my Patreon link. It's in the description below. You get access to all of these videos early for just $1 a month, and it helps me keep the project going. And as always, I want to thank my primary sponsor who helps out with all of the ammunition for these range reports, thus making them financially feasible, my good friend Mark from Brownworks. And yes, once again, I'm coming to you to tell you about the best grip company I know, Brownworks. If you're here to watch a review on this fine rifle made of steel and wood, most likely you have a taste in pistols that are made of steel and wood as well. They take wood panel grips, and maybe on some of those heirloom quality pistols, you're looking for something special and unique that nobody else has. And that's where Brownworks shines. They are a custom grip company making a wide variety of grips for a wide variety of firearms out of a wide variety of exotic woods and materials. He can put on custom logos, custom engravings. He can make laminate woods. As you can see, his work is top notch. He can make anything that you can imagine. I'm going to put a link to his website in the comment section of this video. I'm asking you guys to go over there, check out and see what he has to offer. And sometimes people say, I can't find the gun that I have on his website. Well, Mark is busy making custom grips for a lot of people, and so he spends way more time in R&D and craftsmanship than he does maybe on his website. But I guarantee you, if you contact him, his customer service is off the chart. He will ask you questions. He will find out what you're looking for, and he will set you up with the best set of grips that you can possibly imagine, tailored to your exact specifications. So once again, if you don't see what you're looking for, make sure to contact Mark, and he will definitely set you up. I know that I'm rolling in some footage of his best work right now, and as you can see, it is unique and different. So please support me by supporting Mark at Brownworks. He's a great guy, a huge supporter of the Second Amendment, and when you order and when you contact him, please tell him the Texas Gun Vault sent you. Alright, so let's talk a little bit more about this rifle. I've already told you this was made in February of 1945, and so I'm not 100% sure if this thing ever saw any action in either of the theaters, the Pacific or the European theater, because the war was winding down at that time. The owner of this rifle, Ken, said he doesn't know much about its history, so how it ended up in civilian hands, we're not 100% sure, but it seems to be in really good shape. I know it's all the original furniture Everything on it that I can see has matching serial numbers and period correct parts, so I don't think anything on this has been changed out. It hasn't been sporterized. It's in really good original shape, as you can see. And so that's its history, chambered in 30-06, which of course was a holdover from the M1903 rifles, which were originally chambered in 30-03, but then later changed to 30-06 early in their production. And that's just what the military went with, a full power rifle cartridge. And I should say that when I talk about this rifle and review it, I'm going to try to do it from the perspective of a modern gun person, but somebody that respects the history and tradition of when this rifle was designed and used. Obviously, in today's modern warfare and the modern battlefield, this is an antiquated instrument. This would not give a soldier what they need today. However, in its time, it was exactly what American soldiers needed in World War II. Now, there is some debate on if they had adopted a different rifle, maybe with different features. Could the war have ended sooner? Who knows? This thing was in service from 1936 to 1957 when it was replaced by the M14. And of course, the M14 was chambered in 308, which is kind of a modernization of the 30-06, but essentially is this same rifle, but it was magazine fed, where this one is fed by in-block clips that only hold 8 rounds apiece. And of course, it had full auto capabilities, where this is just semi-automatic. And of course, one of the complaints with the M14 is that it is uncontrollable and fully automatic because it is a full-powered rifle cartridge, where today we use intermediate cartridges because battles are not fought at the hundreds of yards distance. They're now fought at much closer ranges. So as I said, I appreciate the history of this gun, so I'm going to try to review it from that perspective. So let's talk about the things that I like and don't like about this gun. And of course, the most important thing is its history. I mean, this was America's fighting rifle for a long time, and my grandfather and my great uncle who fought in World War II probably carried a rifle just like this. I mean, this is just one of those iconic military weapons that will always hold a special place in many people's hearts. It is a well-designed, robust firearm, and the history and the battles that it was in, it just speaks to the testament of the design and John Garand's work. And it's my understanding that he was not originally a natural-born citizen, but he immigrated to the United States from Canada, and he wanted to serve the country in some way, and he was kind of one of those mechanical geniuses, and he didn't take any royalties from the design of this rifle. That is really, really cool. He gave all the rights up to the US military so they could make them, and he didn't really earn much from his design of this, but he did work with Springfield Armory, and that was his main method of employment. So I also want to talk about the fact that it's made of steel and wood. Now, in today's battlefield and the guns that I typically like to collect, I like polymer, modern materials like aluminum. However, for its time, this is just cool. And you hold this and it feels hefty, it feels weighty, and you realize this is a real battle implement. This is a historic rifle. And so the steel and the wood is just really cool. I love that about this and these older guns, and I can appreciate the materials that went into this. I also really like the robust sights on this. You have all the adjustments in the back, and I think this would give a soldier plenty of ability to adjust for multiple distances, all types of different engagements. I find them to be very easy to use, even though they are relatively old. And of course, modern sighting systems are a lot better with red dots and different types of optics. But for what this rifle is, it's pretty darn good. And just looking at how big and beefy this is, I can see in the battlefield, you are not going to break this. And the last thing that I like that normally I would not like in mini rifles is the weight. Being that this thing is chambered in 30-06, a pretty powerful, full-powered rifle cartridge, I want this thing to be heavy. If it's too light, man, it's gonna kick. And of course, this was designed for the average soldier in the field. And of course, they could be anything from really big to really small, but the average person needed to be able to field this rifle effectively. And although based on our standards today, the weight would be way too much, I think in its time for what it is, it's pretty good. It's hefty. It's going to make this really powerful rifle recoil a lot lighter. But now let's talk about a couple of the things that I don't like. Now, a lot of people are going to say there's absolutely nothing about this rifle not to like. Well, once again, I said I'm going to kind of review this from the modern perspective. And one thing I don't like is the safety. We have this little lever right here, and of course I probably should charge the weapon a little bit so we can activate the safety here. But the safety is right here, and it's a little lever that can go back and forward. And forward it is not unsafe, and back it is safe. I think for a rifle like this, I would really love to have more of like a crossbolt safety that we typically see like in a Ruger 1022. For me, that's just a little bit more ergonomic. I understand why it is designed this way, because if it's in the trigger guard, all you gotta do is push it forward with your finger and you're ready to go. And it also gives you a tactile feel of, is the gun on safe or not? But for me, I don't like that safety. It's just something that I wish they would have designed a little bit different. And the last thing I noticed from having it here on the workbench is the length of pull. This stock for me is a little bit short. Now, my dad and I restored a 1969 Camaro. One of the things I noticed is that the seats in the 1969 Camaro were obviously designed for people that were a lot shorter. I guess back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, people just were not as tall as they are today. I like a long length of pull. Now, I'm 6 foot tall, but this stock feels really short to me. And once again, it was probably designed for a wide variety of people, both tall and short. So they had to come up with something that was in the middle. But for me, the length of pull is just too short. Not that it's uncomfortable, but I definitely do notice it. So the length of pull for me might get in the way, might not make it as ergonomic and as comfortable as I would like it to be. And I'm sure there's things I could add padding on the back to lengthen that up. But the overall length of pull, I think for me, for someone of my height, is a little bit too short. But I know those are two very small gripes, and once again, people are going to say there's nothing wrong with this rifle. It is perfection as it sits on the table, and I can understand why you would think that. All right, so let's get this awesome historical gun to the range. I'm going to load up one of these in-block clips with 8 rounds, because that's all that they hold. And one thing cool about these is when you're out, it ejects that in-block clip and has that unique Garand ping as it hits the ground, and we'll talk about the myth of that in just a few minutes. But we're going to shoot this rifle. I've never shot one. I'm curious what the recoil's like, how it's going to shoot. I'm just excited to get some range time with it. So here we go, just to make sure this gun functions. 10 yards, 8 rounds. Let's see how it shoots. And as expected, it ran flawlessly, and it has a pretty good recoil to it. It's not very heavy at all, and once again, I think that has a lot to do with its weight. For being a trigger that's, what, 80 years old, this thing is pretty darn good. No, it's not the same as our modern triggers with all the modern technology and machining that goes into them, but this is a pretty darn good trigger for what it is. I really like this thing, and let me tell you, it is so much fun. And just shooting this, you just feel the history. And for the first time shooting this, when this thing ejected, I knew it was going to eject. It still kind of startled me a little bit. And I wanted to talk about the myths. I've heard all the stories that when these things eject, they have a very unique sound when they hit the ground. And some people said that's how enemy soldiers knew that the American soldiers were reloading, because it takes a little bit to reload these. And when they hear these in-block clips come out and hit the ground like this, it's a very unique sound. they knew it was time to shoot because the Americans were having to reload. And there's a myth that American soldiers would have extra ones of these and throw them on the ground intentionally. Therefore, the other soldiers would pop up, and that's when the Americans would take their shots. Who knows if that's real? I've heard some people say it was real, some people say it wasn't, but that's just one of those myths. And I know that you can go online, you can read articles about it, and there's really no definitive story to it, but you can believe whatever you want to believe. But that sound really is cool, and it is kind of weird to have a part of the gun kind of pop out right there in front of your face. It did surprise me a little bit. All right, so now let's double the distance on this. Let's go for another 8 rounds. I'm gonna go for the number 1 just above the center of this target. I wanna make sure that I can still shoot a pretty darn good group. These sights are working just fine. And I know some of you guys are gonna say, Jason, you're only at a 25-yard range. Well, when I was at the range, I was reviewing a bunch of guns and I wasn't able to get on the 100-yard rifle range on this day, so we're just gonna have to deal with the range that I have right now. But right now, 20 yards, let's just put some more rounds through this thing and see if I discover anything I like, don't like, or have any issues.
I would definitely change the problem. Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah, more troubleshooting.
And as expected, it shot great. There is one thing I did notice though about the trigger, and that is, maybe it's because I got big old fat fingers and I kind of ride the trigger a little bit low. The bottom of the trigger kind of rubs on my middle of my finger a little bit. So I kind of have to ride that trigger a little bit higher than I normally would want to. It's a little bit uncomfortable, and after shooting for 8 rounds, it kind of pinched a little bit. But once again, it's more probably me and my big old fat finger than anything else. But I'm happy with the grouping. And man, just once again, this gun is so much fun to shoot. All right, well, I'm gonna max out the distance on the target now, only 25 yards. I am gonna bench rest this, so I'm expecting a really good group here. So let me go ahead and do that, see what happens, and then I'll talk about any issues I have when it comes to bench resting this, because I have a feeling that because of the recoil, it's definitely gonna be a little bit different than, let's say, a modern sporting rifle. Yep, and there you go. The rifle, of course, is really accurate. Now, what I was talking about was getting the rifle back onto target. It took me a little bit longer than it normally would. Of course, I'm using iron sights, but when that recoil, you lose the target and you definitely have to readjust. And that's just because you're using a full power rifle cartridge versus more of a modern intermediate cartridge like 5.56 or 7.62 by 39. So it just took a little bit longer for sight reacquisition. But that was the only issue that I had. And this trigger, once again, is really good. It's very consistent. You can predict the break. It's really nice for just a standard military rifle trigger. So really impressed with it, especially with it being so old. All right, so the next thing I want to do is the quick, I guess we're going to call it the clip change. Normally I call it the magazine change. Now, this rifle being fed by in-block clips is probably going to be a little bit slower to reload. And the mechanics of this are kind of awkward, and sometimes people got what they called Garand thumb. If the bolt wasn't back right or the mechanism of the internals were a little bit worn, you could actually get your thumb kind of pinched in here. The rifle honestly looks really good. I don't think that's going to be an issue. And of course, I have not shot the Garand for very long. This is literally my first time shooting this. So I'm going to try to change this thing out as fast as I can, shoot the gun as fast as I can. I'm just curious what the results are going to be. Now, I know there's guys out there that shoot these all the time in matches and love the Garand, and they can probably do it way faster than me. But this is just me trying this out for the very first time. So don't laugh at me if I'm too slow, but this is the disadvantage, I think, of these in-block clips. And going back to what I was saying, imagine if we had a rifle like this that was magazine-fed versus clip-fed during World War II. Well, would our soldiers had an even greater advantage? We don't know, but I like to think that they would. I think box magazines are just better than clips, but I understand this is the way the world worked in the world of firearms for, what, 100 years? But let's see if I can do this fast and how well this gun shoots as fast as I can pull the trigger. And that was definitely a lot slower than a magazine-fed rifle. I think that's one of the big disadvantages to this, that in the battlefield, you're having to look down at the mechanics of the gun to reinsert that clip, where on modern sporting rifles and modern military rifles, you really can keep your heads up because you know how to feed that magazine, get it in and out without looking. And probably with enough time and practice, you could do that as well, but you gotta line everything up. It's a slower process, and of course, as you can see, the gun is a little bit more uncontrollable, and that's what the problem with the M14 that replaced this rifle was, because you're using that full power rifle cartridge. Man, it just wants to rise, it wants to move around. It's not like an AR-15. It doesn't want to stay on target. So shooting this thing fast is a little bit uncontrollable. It's slow to reload. And I guess knowing what we know now and the types of guns that we're used to shooting, I'd be a little bit nervous carrying this. But of course, it was the best they had at the time and was far superior to what our enemies were fielding themselves. So it was still the better rifle, it was still the superior rifle, but man, I still think a magazine-fed rifle like this would have been a huge game changer in World War II. So you also have to tell me what you thought about the quick clip change. I don't know if that was really fast or not. I know it took me a while. All right, so I want to do one more thing before I give you guys my final thoughts, and that, of course, is give my wife Becky a chance to shoot this. She was actually really excited when I got this in for a review. She goes, wow, that is a cool piece of history. It looks old, heavy. I don't know if I'm going to like it, but I definitely want to shoot it because of the battles it was in World War II, because maybe she likes World War II history. We really haven't talked about it too much, but man, was she excited to shoot this thing. Maybe because it's just so different. But let me give her a clip. I know it sounds weird saying the word clip and not magazine. It's actually a clip in this context. And give her a chance to shoot this and see what she thinks. And she definitely thought this thing was heavy and very different than what she's normally used to. In fact, I think she says it best. So let me tell you what she told me. All right. You survived.
Yeah.
You shot a World War II full power rifle. What do you think?
I'm glad I didn't have to fight in World War II.
But for her, the length of pull was actually pretty good, where for me, of course, it's a little bit too short. And she said the recoil wasn't too bad. It's just a big, heavy rifle. But she did enjoy shooting it and thought it was a cool piece of history. So what are my final thoughts on the M1 Garand rifle? 1945 manufacture. Man, is this something cool and very, very different. This is a rifle that I have wanted for my collection in the past. I've just never been able to find one for the right price. The prices on these are just going up and up and up. And I don't know if I'm really into the modern versions of the rifle. I know there's a couple of companies that make these in aftermarket, but I, of course, would want an original one. For me, owning a rifle like this, you just want the original, the historical one. And it's kind of like owning an SKS, which I think I also reviewed, and that was one of Ken's rifles that he lent to me as well. I would only want an original one. I don't want one that's made today, because these things existed in a certain time and place, and they were important, and that's the artifact that I would want. But the prices on these things just keep going up and up and up. And as they get older, they just get more expensive. It is definitely a cool and robust design. The wood on this is fantastic. I treated it as best as I possibly could. Of course, I always respect the guns that are lent to the channel for review. So it was just a better shooter than I was expecting. It's definitely heavy, it's definitely a piece of history. I definitely prefer modern guns over this one when it comes to defending yourself or some type of battle situation. But to look at this and to hold it, you just feel the history. It's so much fun to shoot, and it's just cool. And so getting a chance to shoot this has just been a real pleasure. So on my star system, how would I rate the M1 Garand rifle? Well, I told you I'm going to review this from a modern perspective, but with somebody that appreciates the history and understands the time period in which this rifle was made. I easily give this thing 4.75 stars out of 5. I definitely think it has a few shortcomings, the shorter length of pull, and of course the fact that it uses the clips, but I guess that's really what makes the M1 the M1. But man, having a magazine-fed version of this, I think would have been better. But 4.75 stars because of the coolness factor, the history factor, and this thing is just so well built that even after, what, 80 years, it's still in great shape and runs like a top. Man, this has just been one of the coolest range reports I have ever done. So thank you, Ken, for lending this to the channel. It's been an honor to shoot. So what do you guys think? Do you own any World War II guns? Do you guys own an M1 Garand? Have you ever shot one? What do you think? How do you think it compares to other modern sporting rifles, or even the M14 or the M1A that maybe some of you guys have from Springfield Armory? I would love to know your thoughts. So tell me what you think in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching.